Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And first of all, welcome everybody. And it's great to be here and to see you here, and also people on Zoom, welcome. And I would like to thank, of course, the organizers for organizing this. I think it's fantastic to see seminars like this occurring, because I strongly believe in like combining applications, utility, and business together. That's so important. So it's good to see that, and yeah, I'm privileged and honored to be here. And thank you for the nice introduction, Moran. And I also enjoyed it to get to know you. So let's see if I do it right. First, yes, this one. Okay. Today's presentation is focused actually on algorithms, on AI for healthcare. But since that is like a very hot topic and there's a lot of things that you need to comprehend before starting this, there's a journey towards that. So I would like to take you towards the journey, because I believe that once you're working on innovations and want to bring emerging products to patients and to healthcare, you need to do more than only thinking about, oh, I've got this great AI tool. You have to think about what's before that, what do I need to use, how do I use that? So that's something that I would like to take you along in this journey. But before doing so, I always have to disclose, I feel that I always have to disclose that I have some shares with PathAI and Visiopharm. And my presentation today will be really focusing indeed on the applicability of innovation. Because that is, for me, that is the key to success. If you cannot implement and you cannot apply it, and you cannot bring it to the people who are supposed to serve to the patients, it will never going to happen and it will not take off. And digital health, that's where we are right now. That's a new era that will bring new ways to interact. And that will benefit, actually, I believe in that will benefit everybody. So not only the patient, but also the healthcare providers, industry, you name it. It will, yeah, it will be at the center. And I come from the function and the area in digital health, mostly focused on digital pathology. So my talk will be, lots of that will be focused on digital pathology, and also implementing then it in lab medicine. And I believe that lab medicine is at the center, becoming more and more at the center again, because lab medicine, those people will receive all the samples, they will receive all the test results. They know what next step has to be taken. Do you do a retest? Do you do a reflex test? Or do you say no test, no follow-up test is needed? Instead of putting it at each single healthcare provider, you put it back at the center of lab medicine. That's how I look at it. That's the holistic view. And that can then be orchestrated there at lab medicine. And that will then also create that synergy again between pharma, because they know where to find the right tools, where to find the biomarkers, where to know where the tests are taking place, and how to improve those tests potentially, and then bring that to the healthcare providers. And also payers, of course, that's a very important aspect not to forget. So I'll touch upon that topic very briefly, not too much because that's a whole different topic, but I do want to take that along because it's important for a business case. This all together, I believe that when you're working together, it will result in growth everywhere in data. And so that helps industry, it helps pharma, and it helps the patients again. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about a few things. I would like to start with the background and the history of regulations. So that's a little bit dry stuff, maybe. That's why, what is regulations, why they're there. That's good to have a high level understanding what we're talking about today. Then I will talk about digital pathology case. As I mentioned, we started with, oh, let's bring an AI tool to the market. But before that, we had to do something else. So how do we get there? So I have a use case towards bringing AI to the markets. Then a regulatory landscape around this AI, especially in computational pathology, and one slide on economic utility. But before doing so, I give you all a few seconds to try to log in here, because I'd like to make it a little bit more interactive. Sometimes people, even though I like regulatory a lot, regulatory science, but some people just find it boring. So let's give it some extras. I'm just going off by the people that I see here in the room, where they have access now. Does it work?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, cool. So it's going to be poll. And for that, I have to slide to the internet. And that's here. You already got it. So who are you? Are you business school student, medical, healthcare provider, biotech employee, government, academic, other? Okay, most researchers. Good. I hope you have the aspiration to also to bring some innovation to the market. That's what we're doing it for. All right, thank you. It's good to know the audience a bit more. So I'll take that opportunity and also introduce myself to you, even though Maren already did a great job there. So thank you. But I've been working in pharma in the past. That's how I started my career. I was responsible for bringing drugs to the market, registration studies, and also including that with health economics, like what are the clinical endpoints to get reimbursements for those. And after that, I realized like, okay, we need to have good drugs. For that, you need to have good targets. How do you identify those targets that the drugs hit on? So you need to have good diagnostics. And that's when I moved to the biotech industry, and I moved to Philips, where they were working on digital pathology already since about 2009. And I joined them late 2011. And I was responsible therefore indeed for the regulatory part and medical affairs as well as clinical affairs. So regulatory RACA, if you see that, that means regulatory affairs, clinical affairs. And I've also founded a community, co-founded that together with a pathologist at MGH. Maybe you know him, Dr. Leonards, and also together with the FDA, with the scientific lab there. And I was indeed president of the DPA, the Digital Pathology Association. So maybe you could join that if you're working on digital pathology as well. Why I show this slide because my skill set is just to give you the background, and also because I'm very grateful that I have this privilege to about everything that has been provided to me. I've been in pharma, I've been in medical devices, but I had an opportunity to work from a quality perspective, regulatory perspective, medical, clinical. I've been talking to many healthcare providers, also to payers, been to different parts of the world to get devices and drugs registered there. And I'm very grateful that I had that opportunity. And now what I would like to do is share that with everybody, to share the knowledge so that we can advance healthcare. And that's really my aspiration. And that's also my mission, because I'm a strong believer, if you all work together, if you collaborate, you build that strong foundation, which is really necessary. Connected people have the network. So with that, we're going to develop new devices as well as new drugs, precision medicine, and bring that to the people who we're supposed to serve, to our patients. And that's why I started with this slide, patient first. And actually, this slide is saddening. And that's why I believe in digital health. If you look at it at the former VA doctor, Charleston, that's the 3 veterans. This VA doctor had been under influence when he was diagnosing patients. And out of 34,000 cases, 3,000 errors occurred or missed diagnosis. And that really saddens me. If there would have been digital health already back then, and also digital pathology, that might have been prevented. I'm not saying it would have been prevented, but it might have been helping by flagging something like, hey, are you sure you're making this diagnosis? Or something like that. So I see opportunities there that we can improve healthcare. Also with the one at the bottom, that's actually even worse to me, because due to technology, what we haven't done is optimized our technology. There is interoperability between systems, but actually is not real true interoperability. So if you connect one device with another, it doesn't necessarily communicate with each other. It doesn't exchange the information correctly. 700 patients die each day because of missing connections, missing links in that interoperability. So they mix up patients, for example. And I believe that technology should be used to optimize that and flag like, hey, something is going on, something is missed here. Therefore, because of that, because we miss things and things go wrong, and because unfortunately, there are people in this world who have bad intentions, there are regulations. But also because we have great intentions and sometimes we haven't thoroughly validated it or researched them, and they cause problems. So that's why there are some regulations. So let's go into those details. What is a medical device? If you look into the Code of Federal Regulations, I'm not going to read it, but I just want to highlight a few things. It's that it is an instrument to help making a diagnosis for a disease or a condition. And today, as I mentioned, I'm focusing mostly on digital pathology. So that is an in vitro diagnostic. That means that it's outside the body, of course. What I do want to highlight in this slide, and I should have done a better job at the bottom, the medical device is the technical device plus the intended use plus the country. And why I say that is that the technique will say what kind of device you have, how many risks it introduces. For example, AI is often considered as a kind of a black box. So what we have to do to show the regulators is we have a general model that can be applied over and over again over all type of algorithms, not digital pathology only, but all different type of algorithms. We harmonize that. So if we can show that technique, that already helps. That's one. But often it's different. Everybody's using something different. So that's why we look at it like, okay, technique, that's one part, but then also how are you going to use it, for what patients? Is it a screening tool, for example, by saying you have cancer, you don't have cancer? You can imagine if that's only left to the AI, then that is a big risk because maybe, the AI is making a mistake. It's a false negative. So that intended use then puts us in a higher risk. Sometimes in a different country, they don't consider that a high risk, but a moderate risk. So there's differences between each country in regards to regulations. And you have to take that into account if you're a startup and you think about, oh, I'm going to create this great tool, this digital health tool, and it's easier for us then to disseminate that later on once you got approval. Then you got approval in the US, but you also need to go to all the other countries. And you might have created an architecture that will not fly in another country, or it will fly, but at the highest risk. And then you have to redo a lot of your tests, and that's a pity and a waste of money. So therefore, you need to consider that early onwards. Where do you want to go? What is your strategy? Where do you want to build it? Where do you want to deploy it? So think about that and use your experts to discuss that. Then with regards to focusing on the US, there are 3 classes in risk for medical devices, class 1, 2, and 3. 1 is the lowest, 3 is the highest. And for the lowest risk, you can think of a laboratory information system. That is a low risk. For a class 2 device, moderate risk, for example, if it helps someone to make a diagnosis, then you still have the final control by the person who's making that diagnosis. That's a class 2. And then the class 3 is the highest risk, where you, for example, do the screening of patients, or when you let the algorithm run and come up with a result and no one is involved. That is all considered high risk. Companion diagnostics at this moment are also considered high risk, but the FDA recently announced that they might put them all in a class 2. So they're going to review them. So that's good news, but also interesting to see how that goes.
Esther, can
Yes.
you say what is a companion diagnostic? Maybe not everyone knows.
Okay. What is a companion diagnostic? That is a diagnostic that is a test, I have to say, that puts some patients in a specific category, whether they have a specific target where a specific drug will work on. So it's really like a particular test with a particular drug. That's a companion diagnostic. Thanks for the question. You might hear now and then, you might hear a de novo. What is then a de novo? Well, if there is no predicate device, and what is a predicate device? That is a device that's already on the market and have been cleared by an FDA. And if there's no such predicate, so for example, digital pathology, there was no predicate available. So we had to go, there was the microscope, but then again, the technique was digital instead of like the objectives and just without the entire electronics in there. That was considered so digital pathology was then considered automatically a high-risk device. It always, like if it's a new device, it's always the highest risk. But you can go for a de novo, so then you reclassify it. For digital pathology, the FDA found it a great unknown, so they put it in a class 3 device, and they didn't accept actually at the first a de novo, but luckily we got it accomplished. But that is what a de novo is. So something that is really new and you want to put in a moderate risk class. What does FDA regulate and what not? So FDA has oversight until today on medical devices, which are being promoted and sold. That's something and designed, of course, and manufactured. That is a medical device that FDA has oversight on. A lab developed test, an LDT, that's something that the FDA doesn't have oversight on, because that is being developed in one particular lab for their own patients. It's not supposed to be disseminated, it's not supposed to be promoted, it's just within that lab. And that lab has specified that particular test also for their patients, so it's really local. As soon as you have a medical device and it's brought to a lab, and the lab decides to change the intended use or change some technology in it, then it becomes, and they validate it, then it becomes an LDT as well. And that's not regulated by the FDA.
So for example, if you are developing an AI tool in affiliation with one of the hospitals here, and they want to start practicing that in their lab. Yeah, so just I'll ask the question. So let's assume one of our researchers is developing a new AI application here in collaboration with the hospital, and they want to implement it, let's say at the Dana-Farber, as part of their lab. Based on that, they don't need to go to the FDA first. They could actually go through some other quality process. You'll talk maybe about that, maybe not, but they could basically get approvals for that and start practicing and collecting prospective data and showing that their test works without going through this whole FDA process.
Yes, you got it. You got it. That's true. And then you can regard that as a single site LDT, for example. A next step could be, if you do think it's promising and can be applied somewhere else, you can start making it an IVD if you start collecting data outside, but you cannot promote it yet until you have that clearance from the FDA. Yeah. So I hope to see many coming from this course coming out into the space soon. If you look at the total product life cycle, also TPLC, we regulatory people love acronyms, actually corporate also love acronyms, and probably you do that too. But once you have proof of concepts, you start to, when you have those promising results, that's not yet considered under the scrutiny of the FDA. But once you decided like, this is promising and I want to make a product, that's where you start like, okay, let's now develop it under design control and use the quality system regulations or your quality management system. Then you start to planning, start writing down the user requirements, the product requirements, the specs. Then you do your verification. And you make sure the verification is that you test whether you meet your specs. So for example, I have an algorithm that needs to identify a cell membrane. So that's verification. Then you go to, and then it does that, and you say we passed it. You do all that, and then you go to validation, where you really check like, okay, I want to use this on lung cancer patients to make sure that it captures the biopsies and identifies the patients with lung cancer. That is validation. So the device performs as it is intended. And then you go to transfer it. So once you have that all done, you transfer it to the manufacturer. So for software, that's often like, why should we do that? But still, you have to show that process that you can install it on all different kind of healthcare providers, software, lab information system, wherever. That's where you transfer, and you need to validate that process. And then you can deploy it. But once you deployed it, you need to keep track of it. Where has it been deployed? Who installs it? How do you install it? What is the configuration setting? Can we service it? So you need all track of that, because maybe an event occurs, and if that event occurs, you have to make sure that you know where it occurred. If it's like on the population, you might have to do a recall of the entire device, and then you need to know which site you have to contact to do the recall. So now the use case towards AI in digital pathology. But before doing so, I'm curious. So if consider you're a patient, and everybody has been, I guess, once in a lifetime been a patient, would you be comfortable that software as a medical device would make your diagnosis and recommend treatments instead of your healthcare provider, instead of your doctor would do that? Let's see, advance. Oh, it's not picking it up. Here you go. That's interesting. I'm honest, I myself, I'm still a bit hesitant. You got an email? Right, so it's interesting to see. I have that myself as well. I'm like I don't know if I would be comfortable, even though I know what has to be done, how it's being reviewed, how many tests have been done. I'm still like, yeah, I don't know. Just like self-driving cars, I also not really comfortable yet. So I think it's also a mindset that we have. So thank you all for completing this. So what happened with digital pathology? Actually, as I mentioned, before you go into AI, you need to look at like what's already there. So for the FDA, jumping straight away to AI, that was a big leap. Because the device is actually the acquisition device, that's the input to the AI. So we need to make sure that that device is functioning properly. But also when you review it at a screen, that the image and the pixels are pixelated correctly. If you set two screens next to each other, you always have a different image. So are you still comfortable making the diagnosis? So that's what FDA mentioned, like this is a great unknown. It's innovation in pathology. Like there's many innovations everywhere, but pathology, like over decades, no real innovation happened. This was the big innovation. So they were really hesitant and wanted to learn more. So they had what we did, and especially with Digital Pathology Association, we worked a lot with them together. We collaborated with the FDA, we had many meetings with them to find out, okay, what are your real concerns? How can we address them? Do we address them correctly if we do this test or that test? And mostly what came to us is that indeed it's the technology, and that's what you see in that table over there, the color reproducibility, but also that we were trying to find mitigations, and the FDA looked at it like, well, those are not really mitigations, you're just rephrasing the problem. Because we said, okay, if we do it like this, and they said, well, no, every device has been developed differently, and every manufacturer is coming up with a different design. So there are no general principles yet. So how can we overcome that? How can we create those general principles? That's what they were really looking for the technology. And then also making sure that whatever control measures we took in place, that we're not saying it all comes down to the pathologists, that they have to make sure that the device works properly. Now, you as a designer have to also make sure that your device works properly. So this is what we came up with, even though we were not really happy with it, but that was the only way to do it, is that the acquisition device, so the scanner, and it's nice to see all the heads go like this. It was a scanner, so that's the upper square, so to say, with the dotted line, and then the workstation, which is the viewer, and then also the display itself. All that is the entire pixel pathway, and that's considered as one system device by the FDA. And again, you can imagine that everybody has a different file format, like just your own phone cameras have different file formats and different light sources, etc. So how can we address that to the FDA, that they're getting comfortable that it's all okay and working properly? Question.
I'm going to be super naive because maybe others are not going to ask this. Can you just explain to us what is digital pathology? Because I have a feeling that maybe some people in the audience don't have the same definition as some others.
Do you want to take it? So what is digital pathology? Actually, so what you now see, pathologists review slides using a microscope. And what digital pathology does is they take that slides, they scan it, and an image will be created. And the scanning is being done like often with Z scanning or line scanning or multi-stacks, those kind of things. And based on that, the software, so that is the second box in the workstation, the image management system, that is creating then, it's the image processing, it uses all the tiles that have been scanned and it compiles it and makes an image out of it. And then an image is being displayed on a monitor. That's a good question, because indeed, that's one of the concerns we had as well. That was one of the issues. Everybody's using different language because a lot of people thought like digital pathology is also AI. And it might be, but now they're talking about computational pathology. So, but then what is computational pathology? So before we went into developing algorithms, we needed to have this clear. We needed to have the technical device totally tested, as well as how it's being implemented in clinical practice. So we had to address that through clinical studies, but also, of course, technical testing. But the clinical studies, like replacing the microscope, that's actually what we were testing with the clinical study. You can imagine there's so many stains, so many biomarkers too. So a breast cancer case can have an estrogen receptor positive biomarker. It can also have HER2 positive. So all those different stains for all the different diseases and throughout the entire body, like derm, prostate, breast, intestines, brain, everything had to be tested. So it was a lot of work. And that's why we came up with discussions with the FDA that we were going to do a study, non-inferiority, to say like, we're not worse than a microscope. And we had to include 2,000 cases and 16 pathologists, and they all had to read it. But if you think about it, 2,000 cases, some cases could consist of 60 slides. So that would be like an enormous undertaking. So that's hard, and we had to be smart. So what we did, and that's not what we did with the Digital Pathology Association, but each manufacturer came up with their own creative thoughts. And what we did is we came up with representative slides. So we only took 2 slides out of each case and saying, you can make a diagnosis based on this. We also looked at how we're going to adjudicate this. So adjudication saying like, if there is a discordant case using a microscope versus digital, what is the correct value? So those kind of things we did in a smart way. And that only could happen because we worked together with the engineers who knew about technology, worked with pathologists, with product management and regulations, as well as with clinical people, to make sure that we were addressing the right things. And with that, we actually outpaced the competition. So therefore, that's something I want to give to you as well. If you're thinking about innovation, and involve your entire team, because you have so many smart people, and when you're sitting together, you complement each other and you create synergy. And that is what we did, and that's how we got it accomplished to get the de novo. This is also something, I'm not going to read through it, but just to highlight how you can involve everybody in your team to come up with an intended use. Because an intended use is really about, that drives also the classification of the device. Like, is it a high risk or a moderate risk or a low risk? So that's something that you can all do together. What would we have done differently? Well, as I mentioned, in 2009, we started at Philips. I joined them late 2011. And also their regulatory and clinical was not really involved in that review process well in time. So a lot of changes that happened, we were not involved, and that came back to us and did bite us later on. We had to redo some testing. We didn't discuss enough upfront with the FDA. And the FDA is they're really open, they're really collaborative. They're not like the watchdog of course they are a watchdog, but they're not the difficult watchdog as you think. They really want to bring innovation to patients as well, but they have that balance that they're also protecting population. So just work with them. So that's something that we definitely have gone different. And the commercialization, that's very important, because that's all what you have to think about as well. How do you bring it to market? And we involved our commercial and marketing team too late. They were not ready to go to market, because once we had the FDA clearance, they were like, oh, now what? We have to convert all these research devices into medical devices. How are we going to do that? They didn't have a plan readily available. We didn't have all the brochures ready to have this big bang. And also we didn't know what's the next step. Do we go to China? Do we go to Japan? What's the business case there? Is there a reimbursement? Yes or no? So that's something that I definitely say, like, involve the entire team from the beginning, make a planning together, and then you know who to involve when. What not to change? The collaboration within the team was really good. So that's something I truly recommend. Once we were there together, we all brainstormed, we helped each other. We were really, truly collaborative, but definitely also complementary. Engineer engagement at a certain point in time. A lot of people think when I'm done with development, I just throw it over the fence. Regulatory, good luck. That's happening a lot. And that's also a pity, because regulatory doesn't know everything what engineering have been doing. And they usually have like great ideas how to convince an FDA with regards to technology. What did you say? What kind of safeguards did you put in? And regulatory doesn't always know that. So you really truly need to help each other there. So now into computational pathology. But before doing so, a poll. I think yes. So there was a recent study. It was published in October 2022, and 1,000 non-small cell lung cancer patients, they were diagnosed, but how many didn't benefit of precision oncology? What percentage? So did not benefit. What is the percentage? All right. Still shifting. But let's move on for the sake of time. But thank you for completing. And yeah, you're all close by. And this is also, again, it's saddening. It's actually out of the 1,000, 356 out of 1,000 didn't get the right treatment. 1/3. 1/3. Many mistakes were made. Also, the turnaround time, waiting for a test result takes a long time. And if your loved one has cancer, you think about, only thing you can think about, treat it, treat it, treat it. So you just want to start treating it. And often they start then with chemotherapy. But a lot of people don't know that chemotherapy can also limit the effects of the second line therapy of other, like immuno-oncology, for example. Immunotherapy sometimes might not work anymore when you gave chemo. So that happened a lot. A lot of retests were supposed to be done, could not be done because the tissue was exhausted. Some different tests were done already. So all that, yeah, hampered those patients, unfortunately, to get the right treatments. So also here, I believe we have this great task and this privilege actually to work on AI and bring this to patients to prevent that this will ever happen again. But of course, we need to focus on certain things. There is an issue, as I mentioned, that's not on this list, but tissue is often the issue in pathology. Terminology that came along already many times, but also how do we harmonize that? Moran asked already a few questions. What is digital pathology? What is computational pathology? So that's something we really need to consider, that we all talk the same language. Software validation. Validation for me, for a regulatory person, is totally different than software validation. And we often had disagreements when we were discussing things within the engineering team and regulatory. And it could take like forever. And then we thought like, oh, I actually mean the same thing. So it's a waste of time. So let's make sure that we all understand and talk the same language. So one of the things that we did with the DPA, we said, let's come up with a glossary. Let's say what is computational pathology, and we wrote a paper about it. Also, what is very important is, of course, data governance, and who owns the data, who can access the data, ethics, equity, all that needs to take into account. And I will dive into that a little bit more. So this is not only for digital pathology, but for all AIs. And I think most of you know this or might know it, or have heard about it. But we all know that data, of course, what we train the algorithm with is as good as we are. So the input, how we're providing it to the algorithm to train it, that's something how well the algorithm will function. But not only the data, also the coder. How does coding happen? Because one coding engineer might code different than the other coding engineer, and you might have different results. So that's something that you need to take into account as well. Also, what type of data do you use? Has it already been analyzed, or is it like the real, for example, for images, do you use the native file format, or do you already use process images? That's a big difference. That's something that you need to take into account when you're getting the data collected. Once you start processing it, you need to think about it too. Like, how do you process it? What kind of analysis do I apply? What do I not apply? And how do I then implement that and validate it? Also, over time, you will see, for example, the NCCN guidelines change. Other guidelines in standard of care change. Cutoff points change. Like, does someone has cancer? Yes or no? Because we learn. But then your algorithm might be outdated. So that's something that we need to take into account. An algorithm is pretty binary. It's usually yes or no, black or white, 1 or 2. So that's the algorithm doesn't have context. So a lot of times ethics are disregarded. And that's why we still have the human in the loop. And also the emotional, of course, the emotional factors are playing a role, because sometimes there is medication recommended, but the patient doesn't want it. That can happen. So all that we need to take into account. And this is where I usually think about the self-driving car. It's always being thought like, thought that you cannot harm people, you cannot kill people. So that's rule number 1. So when the car drives straight ahead and there's a pedestrian, it needs to brake. But then there's a car behind it, can't brake, because then someone else might get killed or get harmed. I turn left, oh, another pedestrian, I turn right, big wall, I hit the wall. Car will get a short circuit, like, yeah, there will something, and yeah, it cannot make a decision anymore. It cannot say, like, I go straight ahead, left, right. So nothing happens. Human can make that decision based on experience. So that's why you often will see that the human is still in the loop. With regards to AI, what is very important with regards to, this is the purple wheel that you see, that's that TPLC, the total product lifecycle again. So that's what you need to take into account, because medical devices and software, and that's where the FDA focuses on as well, and that's why they have so many questions. If you develop a software that you run, for example, on an Apple, will run differently on a Dell computer, will run differently on Windows. So that's something that you have to think about when you're developing your software, that it can work on everything. How many CPUs does it take? How many, does it run in the cloud or somewhere else? Does it run on-prem? All that is very important for regulations, and you need to take that into account. Not even for regulations, but also for healthcare providers. They often don't want to use cloud because of security. Then on top of that, updates are made available. If there is a bug in the system or something, or if something goes wrong, then what you often do is you make that update, but the user will not install it. I am often myself fault with as well, and it says like, oh, you have a new software version. Want to install it? No, not now. Postpone that. So if that happens with your medical device, who is then responsible for not installing it? Is that the manufacturer or the user? That's something that you need to take into account when you go to an FDA. They'll ask you that question. How do you make sure that it is installed if there is a serious bug? Also, how do you make sure as a manufacturer that your software can be copied and put somewhere else on a different device where it might harm another software system or might not function as well. So that's outside the control of the manufacturer, but what you can control as manufacturer is that they are not allowed to copy it. And it's also good practice because if you are not allowing it to copy it, then you can make more money, of course, because you can sell it to more people. Life cycle aspects, of course, then are also that how rapid are the development changes? Because in the past, we always used the waterfall approach with hardware. Most of the medical devices were hardware devices, so it was really slow, like, okay, now this step, that step, and go on. With software, it's so iterative, it learns, it goes fast. But that's also a big concern, of course, for us and for the FDA. What is that self-learning software doing? Can we control it? Think about that, what was it called? TAI, if I'm not mistaken, was put online like years ago. And it was asked by the community, can you feed into it? What does it need to do? Can you provide that information? And suddenly Hitler became a great guy. So that is something that's really scary. So they took that bot offline within 16 hours because it was trained incorrectly. So that's something that we need to consider when we go to an FDA, like what data is allowed to be inputted into the device when it's self-learning. Most of the things, so what I would like to highlight is what does this all mean for the FDA, for a manufacturer, and for the user. So I'm now focusing on the FDA. They emphasize two main goals. You always have to think about protecting the patient safety. Always, always, always patient first. Then promoting transparency. What does it mean is that, again, the language, we talk the same language. That's important. Everybody understands what everybody's saying. Manufacturers, that's the other thing. Like, what is the intended use and anticipated users? Are you targeting healthcare providers? Are you targeting patients? Big difference. Design control, manage risks, label and test. So what does it mean if you have a package insert and I just put it on your table and you read it? Are you able to understand it? Or the design of your algorithm, is that user-friendly? You don't need that package insert. You just can, oh, it's self-intuitive. I just click this button, that button, and I get a result and I know what to do with it. That's something that you need to consider and also need to test for that. There's human factor studies that FDA requires in medical devices. With regards to the users, we always think like, okay, we're done as a manufacturer. No, you need to make sure that the user also understands what you're saying. What is in your labeling? Does the user understand? If I, for example, have the CPU requirements, do I give it just to the user and sell it to them, knowing that they don't have the CPU? Well, that's not what you're supposed to do. So you need to check that the user also understands what is the IT requirements for my software, what is the operational system, do they have that? Should I offer also different operating system, different CPUs, on-prem installation, those kind of things. And the users need to make sure that they ask those questions. They have the responsibility too. So having said that, it's crucial that you do your, of course, your user research very thoroughly at the beginning and during. So often you see that manufacturers use a user group to inform them about what the device should look like. Then very recently, the FDA, because of the fast lifecycle management, that's AI can be self-learning. There is a recent guidance that got introduced, and it's called the PCCP, the Predetermined Change Control Program. And actually, it's not really new because it has been used in hardware, but a lot of people didn't know it. But now they have made it like PCCP for AI ML. And if you dare identify when you submit your own device for an approval, you can then also include in the PCCP process, like, this is what I want to change. And maybe you do that in 6 months because software changes fast. So that's why they put this into life, is if I want to change something, this is what I want to change. This is how I'm going to change it. And this is how I'm going to test it that indeed functions properly and it performs as it's intended to perform. So if you define those things upfront and put them in your submission, and the FDA clears that, approves it, you can go, you can make those changes without going back to an FDA, ask them for approval. So with that, we have faster life cycles and we can bring innovation to patients faster. So I think this is a great idea that this came to life, and also opens doors for the future for self-learning AI. Then with regards to guidelines, what is out there with software, and I can go into many deep discussions with you, but I just give you a few highlights. What I think is important is always think about what claims are you going to make, and claims, what I mean with that is like on what patients are you going to use it, but also if you say I'm faster than in clinical practice, you also have to show that you are faster. So you have to have evidence for that. So think about that. Most important thing, your device should always be developed to do no harm. There are many guidances available. Just to give you an idea, in 1 year time, I think it was last year, 50 guidances were published by the FDA that applied for digital pathology alone. 50, so that's a lot. It keeps me off the street, so that's great. But it's also something that you need to consider. That's for a lot of software. Many more are coming, are being published, as well as new acts. In Europe, for example, they have the AI Act. In Canada, they already have an act for AI. In the UK, they have a different one. Of course, the general principle is the same: do no harm. A lot of things are the same with regards to how to prevent bias and those kind of things. But there are nuances. So that's where you also need to work together with your engineers and your regulatory team to ensure that you grasp that and that you have that included. Before we go into the one slide of economic utility, what I would like to give to you as a takeaway, I just want to ask you, are you already using any type of AI in your daily life? I'm just curious. And if so, can you indicate for what? For example, hey Siri, just what should I eat tonight? That's working. Text editor coding. Oh yeah, email. See, there's more than I myself realize what I already use on AI. Great. Thank you. By the way, I think you can all download if you want, the results when you participated. If not, let me know and I'll share it with you. And then maybe if people ask for it, you can share it. Economic utility. So this is the last slide. What is really good to already start thinking about it when you're developing your algorithm or developing digital health. Think about it upfront, what you want to accomplish. It's closely linked to clinical utility, and clinical utility is that it brings benefit to patients, but also is beneficial for healthcare providers. And the economic utility is something that we need to think about as, does it reduce maybe downstream costs? Does it increase IT? Those kind of things. What often happens, and that also happens in digital pathology, is that you see a shift with regards to, I might be faster in diagnosis, so I spend less time. So with that, I'm reducing the cost of using a pathologist, but it will increase the IT costs because storage is huge. An image for digital pathology is easily 500, 600 gigabytes. So that is very expensive. That's also how healthcare providers look at it. You might come up with this great innovation and you think like, oh, we're faster, we're more accurate. It reduces the downstream cost with patients getting earlier access to medicine. With that, they're not being admitted to the hospital, so save a lot of money. Yeah, show it. That's one. Need to collect that evidence and show it. Certainly to get a CPT code from CMS. But also think about it. What is needed to implement it? What of extra steps do you need to do as a healthcare provider or as a lab director or as a user or as the consumer or as a patient? So if you add that all up, all these benefits, they might be incremental, but also the cost might be incremental. And if the costs outweigh those benefits, because that's how people do look at it, then it might not be used, even though it might be value-based care compared to volume-based care, it might not get attraction. So that's something that you really need to consider. With digital pathology, you see that happening as well. At this moment, the return on investment is low when you're purchasing a scanner and putting all the IT equipment in place, having a few algorithms. It will not outweigh, those benefits at this moment do not outweigh the cost yet. So for some hospitals it does, but for most of the labs it doesn't. So they are not purchasing the scanners yet. They wait till there's more menu, more algorithms. But that hampers actually innovation, because who's going to innovate if there's no return on investment for innovation? So think about that. That's also why I used this use case with regards to you first need to come up with the hardware, and then you have the imaging device, and then you develop your algorithm. So think about it when you start developing it. Include everybody in your first meetings before you really kick it off. That's the take-home message that I want to give you. So I'd like to thank you all for listening in, and also for the people online and taking part in the polls. I enjoyed it to see how many people are using what. So thank you for doing so. Time for questions or? Yeah, okay. Questions online, here. Yeah.
You mentioned the economics of. You mentioned the economics of digital pathology are not there quite yet. At what volume for a particular hospital would you need to get kind of the break-even point and then have it be economically viable?
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question. I cannot answer that, because it's, I dislike to say it, but it depends, and it does depend. Because you might have, for example, if you buy a high throughput scanner, it's more expensive. It also requires more storage. So if you have a lot of high throughput, then it might be worth it. So a great use case, by the way, was I think it was Quest, that they invested a lot in scanners, because instead of like having everything shipped using couriers, they now scanned it. And they were so much faster as well with turnaround time that they said, this is worth it. Another hospital that I talked to, they mentioned, like, we actually didn't do the return on investment. We already see that it's worth it, because we, for example, what happened in the past, they had a patient who was diagnosed incorrectly, and they made a claim, and they couldn't find the slide anymore on what on what slide the diagnosis was made. So, and with that, they couldn't defend themselves. So if you would have had digital pathology and scan everything, you might have easily retrieved it. So it really depends. What I can say is, on the Digital Pathology Association, you need to be a member though, it's not too expensive, but there is a return on investment calculator. They made a great input tool where you can say, I have this amount of cases per year, this many slides per year, this many stagings per year, I have these many FTEs, and there you can, then you can get a good estimate. Yep.
You're right here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the talk. Yes. So just a question, can you compare and contrast diagnostic versus a companion diagnostic, and then the pros and cons from an entrepreneurial lens?
Which one, sorry?
A diagnostic versus a companion diagnostic.
Yeah. So for a companion diagnostic, that can be of great value. I'm going to stand here because that's also for the Zoom people. That's of great value and also of great risk. So what you often see with the medtech companies is that they invest in it, they want to invest in it, but they're with the diagnostic, there's less risk than with the companion diagnostic. And why I say that is with a diagnostic, it can go to market, and you're independent of the pharma company, of the drug. With a companion diagnostic, it's a higher risk class device, and until now, maybe it will be reclassified to a class 2. So that puts it in a higher risk. That's already a lot of scrutiny, that's one. 2, you're depending, of course, on that select patient group that you're gonna get your diagnostic developed towards. So it's less spread for the entire population. So you have a smaller target group that you have. Then also with regards to companion diagnostic, there's a big difference with regards to threshold values. So you need to be very specific in the target. You need to know that your target is specific, your sensitivity is really high. And towards that development phase, it might also be that your diagnostic is really good, but that the drug is not efficacious. So the drug might fail, and then your device will fail as well. While your device might have been great, but then all the investment that you have done will probably not be returned unless you can find a different use case for that. So companion diagnostics are usually a higher risk. And what you often see is that the pharma will base this on milestone payments, for example. And each time you review the milestones, did you meet them? Are we there? What are the risks? And then based on the risk, you see the evolvement of the diagnostic.
Esther, can I add to this on an angle?
So just context, I used to work in a company that kind of established the concept of companion diagnostics in cancer genomic profiling called Foundation Medicine. And the upside of investing in working on a companion diagnostics is that it might help from a business perspective get reimbursement. Because if you're creating a diagnostic to something, what is it good for? It's only good for you if you could act on it, right? And when will someone pay for this diagnostic test, especially if it's an expensive diagnostic test? Insurer will pay for that if they'll know that that would lead you to get treatment that is actually going to, help you and reduce the overall expenses and help you live, right? So if you do have such a claim, and you do show that you're saving more lives and you're paired with a treatment, you'll actually open a path to get reimbursement for your test, because usually the tests are way cheaper than the treatment itself. And if you're now bringing a targeted therapy for cancer, for example, to the market, and it comes together with a companion diagnostic, that companion diagnostic has a higher chance to be successful commercially. And that's an important piece. That's at least in cancer diagnostics, that played an important role. And this is why in this area of digital pathology that is trying to bring new diagnostics to the market, based on your cancer tissue image, rather than doing molecular profiling of that cancer tissue, there's a lot of companies that have been taking this approach of companion diagnostics, the same as how genomics profiling did 10 years ago, when that started to be used to diagnose patients.
Thanks. And indeed, you often, by the way, there is a regulatory pathway as well. It's called breakthrough designation within the FDA. And you often, when you have a companion diagnostic, you often can get that pathway. And FDA is looking again together with CMS to make sure that you get reimbursed for that, because it is innovation and they want to make sure that that will occur, that will be brought to patients. So there is for the first 2 years or something that the device is on the market, they withdrew that, but they're looking into it again. so that you can get paid for that. And then while it is on the market, you need to collect evidence so that later on it will also be that your reimbursement is granted. So there's a great incentive when it goes through. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Do you see, by the way, people online have questions?
Thank you. I think the potential utility to users and to patients seems like relatively clear. I'm wondering, as you think about the design of new products in the digital pathology landscape, how do they, or how should they think about designing not only for patients and for outcomes, but also for fitting into the current clinical workflow of pathologists and the people who will be doing these tests? I imagine for some, it could be super straightforward if you're just swapping out one instrument for another, but for others, it might change the entire flow of a sample from the OR to the pathologist and back.
Yeah, and that's a real that question. It's so valid, and we see that a lot, that it is difficult because implementing digitology, some need to change the entire workflow. Also, when I mentioned like the file format, of course, will have influence on what kind of algorithm you use. So a lot of hospitals also say, or healthcare providers or labs, they say like, do I then need to have 20 scanners in place just to run any algorithm that it has trained on a Philips scanner or on a Hamamatsu scanner whatsoever? So that's something that you need to take into account, but not necessarily only that, also the entire workflow, because HemePad is totally different than CytoPad. So you need to have maybe a different cockpit set up, so to say, for each workflow that you're using. So that's a very good question, and it's a challenge. There are many platform companies out there who are thinking about this and how to do it. There are also more and more clinical application specialists who are looking into that and helping pathology labs to work on this and how to standardize and validate it internally for themselves. And there's also a foundation now, and they're really looking into how can we set up a workflow that, and it's called the DDX Foundation. How can we set up a workflow that could work in this lab? We make blueprints of that and we disseminate that to the next lab, and they can implement it as well. So they're really trying to share that knowledge, how you have to set that up. I think that's, and then just copy paste, so to say, roll it out everywhere. But it is a big undertaking. Yeah. Thanks. Yep. I just keep going until you say stop.
Receptions.
Hi, one of the questions that I have is that we always have a gap between low and middle income countries and the countries that have like more possibility because they have like technology and data and all this stuff. One of my biggest concerns is artificial intelligence now, because all the program and all the stuff came from data that was accumulated for a long time. How we can address the challenge in low and middle income countries?
Very much with you on that. It's how we can address it. I don't have the clear answer, but I do have thoughts. So what, I'm also working on that. I help certain foundations to go to underserved areas, also here in the US, actually. So not only in the other countries, but it is something that we need to realize if there is in every country the infrastructure to put a device there. So there are also solutions for devices that, for example, have the storage on the device itself. So we can put like only the microscope there plus such a device. But then collecting the data, that's something else. How we're going to collect it. And also there with this DDX Foundation, for example, we're thinking about, can we set up a blueprint how to collect the data and use that here, bring that also to the people here so that they can use it into their algorithm development. And we also believe that pharma is very interested in receiving the data because they also need to go to those areas, of course. And they need to train algorithms and need to target therapy on those specific diseases as well. So there is certainly interest, but there's thoughts about it, but it's not easy. It's not easy because of the infrastructure is missing in some countries. But there are people who are working on it and setting it up. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll add the last question.
Yep, last question.
Thank you. Thank